Kofi called it a clarification session. He arrived with his lawyer. A prepared statement. The composed ease of a man who has run the numbers and believes they are on his side. Abena, he said, I want to be clear. You were a supporter. You believed in what I was building, and you lent me money when I needed it. But you were never a partner. There was no equity agreement. There are no documents. He let that sit. Abena looked at him for a moment. Then she opened her laptop. On the screen, a spreadsheet, 47 rows, each one a transaction. The reference fields read, Investment Round 1, Investment Round 2, all the way to 47. Transaction references, she said. From every transfer. I labelled them that way at the time. So did you, in your confirmation messages. She opened a second tab. 3 years of emails, subject line, OKR, Tech Equity Structure. Then a third, a WhatsApp screenshot, March 2021. Kofi's number, 11:42 p.m. Partner 30% confirmed. We're doing this. The room was very quiet. There are no documents, Abena said. You're right about that. She looked at her former best friend across the table. But there are 47 transactions, 3 years of emails, and a message you sent at 11:42 p.m. the night we agreed the terms. A pause. Which would you like to start with? Let me tell you about Abena Asante and Kofi Okyere before Okyere Tech, before the 47 transactions, before the clarification session that was not the kind of clarification Kofi had intended it to be. They had been friends since university, the specific kind of friendship that forms between two people who recognize something in each other that they have not found elsewhere. Kofi was the ideas person, restless, generative, the kind of mind that produced 10 concepts before breakfast and needed someone to help him figure out which one was actually worth pursuing. Abena was the systems person, precise, analytical, someone who could take an idea and map it onto reality with the specific skill of someone who understood that vision, without execution, is decoration. They had studied together, argued together, built each other's thinking for 6 years before either of them graduated. After university, Kofi had gone into tech, starting at a software company in Accra, learning the industry from the inside, building the specific knowledge base that he would eventually leverage. Abena had gone into financial analysis, a natural fit for someone whose mind worked the way hers did, who had always been the person in any room who understood what the numbers actually meant. They had stayed close through the working years, the specific closeness of two people who had been essential to each other's thinking for so long that the habit had become structural. Kofi called her in 2020. He had an idea, not the 10th idea before breakfast, but the idea that had the quality of seriousness about it. A platform for connecting Ghanaian artisans with international buyers, something that already existed in pieces but not as a coherent, designed system. He had been thinking about it for 2 years. He had done the market research. He had the technical knowledge to build the MVP. What he needed was capital to get started and someone whose judgment he trusted enough to talk to about the parts he was not sure about. How much? Abena asked. He told her. It was not a small number for someone at her stage of career. It was the kind of number that required planning, required sacrifice, required the specific commitment of someone who was not just a supporter, but was genuinely betting on the outcome. She did not answer immediately. She took 2 weeks. She modelled the business not as a favour, but as the due diligence of someone about to make a significant financial decision. She looked at the market, the competition, the technical requirements, the timeline. She looked at Kofi, his ability to execute, his network, his specific combination of technical skill and entrepreneurial hunger. At the end of the 2 weeks, she called him back. I'm in, she said. But I'm not lending you money, Kofi. I'm investing. I want 30%. There was a pause. Then 30 is high. 30 is what this capital is worth at this stage, she said. You have the idea and the technical skills. I have the capital and the analytical framework that's going to keep you from making the expensive mistakes every founder makes in year 1. That's not a loan. That's a partnership. He agreed. They talked through the terms over 3 more conversations, what 30% meant, what the vesting looked like, what her involvement in decisions would be. And then, on a night in March 2021, at 11:42 p.m., he sent her the message that would matter more than either of them knew at the time. Partner 30% confirmed. We're doing this. She transferred the first amount the following morning. And I want to stay with that March 2021 evening for a moment, because that message, partner 30% confirmed, we're doing this, was not sent carelessly. It was sent at 11:42 p.m., which is the hour of decisions that have been thought through all day and are finally being committed to. It was sent by a man who had spent 3 more conversations after the initial yes, working through the terms, what 30% meant, what the vesting looked like, what her role in decisions would be. He had not agreed casually. He had agreed after thinking about it seriously and had marked the agreement with the specific language of a person who wanted the other person to know that it was real. We're doing this. Not, I'll think about it. Not, sounds good, let's talk more. We're doing this. The language of someone who has decided. Abena had received the message and gone to bed. She had not needed the exclamation marks. She had not needed the celebration. She had needed the 30% and the clarity that it was agreed. And she had both. The following morning, she had made the first transfer with the reference field that read Investment Round 1, because that was what it was, not a loan, not a gift, not a gesture of friendship, an investment. In a company that she had spent 2 weeks analysing and had concluded was worth her capital and her judgment, and 30% of whatever it became. She had been right about the analysis. She would spend the next 3 years proving this, one Tuesday evening at a time. And here is what I want you to understand about those 3 years before we get to what went wrong in them. They were good years for the company. OKA Tech grew because 2 people who understood their respective domains, one who could build the technology and lead the team, one who could read the numbers and see around corners, were working in the same direction. The pricing error catch, the segment identification, the Series A timing, these were not lucky guesses. They were the output of someone who had spent 2 weeks modelling this business before she invested and who had spent the following 3 years tracking every metric that mattered. The partnership was real. While it lasted, it worked. Here is what 3 years of investment looked like. It looked like the first transfer, the largest, the seed capital that paid for the MVP development and the first 6 months of operations. She sent it with a reference that read, Investment Round 1, because that was what it was. She was not thinking about legal protection when she wrote that. She was thinking about accurate record keeping, which was how she thought about everything financial in terms of what accurately described what the transaction was. It looked like the second transfer 4 months later, when the MVP was built and tested and Kofi needed capital for the go-to-market push. Investment Round 2. She had reviewed the product, by then had spent a weekend going through the platform with the same analytical attention she brought to everything, identifying 3 structural problems that would have cost significant money to fix later and suggesting solutions for each. Kofi had implemented all 3. He had told her, afterward, that those suggestions had saved them 6 months of backtracking. It looked like the Tuesday evenings, twice a month, when they got on a call and she went through the metrics with him. Revenue numbers, user acquisition costs, retention rates, the specific mathematics of a platform business that she understood and he was learning. She was not a passive investor. She was the person who caught the pricing error in month 4 that was costing them 15% of potential revenue. She was the person who identified the buyer segment in month 8 that would eventually become the platform's primary market. She was the person who, in month 14, told Kofi that the Series A he was planning to pitch was being pitched at the wrong valuation and that he should wait 3 months. He waited. The platform's metrics improved. The Series A closed at a valuation 40% higher than the number he had originally planned to pitch. She did not take a fee for any of this. She had 30% of the company. The value of that 30% was the return on her work and her capital and her judgment. That was the arrangement. It was not written in a formal document. It was written in 47 bank transactions, 3 years of emails, and one WhatsApp message sent at 11:42 p.m. The friendship changed in year 2. Not dramatically, there was no single moment, no fight, no confrontation. It changed in the specific way that friendships change when one person's circumstances shift significantly and the other person's do not shift in the same direction. Okia Tech was growing. Kofi was becoming someone different from the person who had called her from a shared office in 2020, someone with investors and a board and a team of 23 people and a reputation in the Accra tech ecosystem was building towards something significant. He was being written about. He was being invited to speak at things. He was becoming, in the specific vocabulary of the startup world, a founder. And Abena was not in any of those stories. She was not in the press about Okia Tech. She was not mentioned in the investor pitches. She was not introduced at the events. She was the person on the Tuesday calls whose questions improved the company's decisions, whose capital had made the company possible, whose name was on 47 bank transfers that described themselves as investment rounds, and she was invisible in the public story of what had been built. She noticed this. She did not say anything immediately. And I want to be precise about what it cost to not say anything immediately, because Abena was not a passive person. She was someone who had spent 6 years building an analytical career on the foundation of saying the precise true thing at the precise right time. Staying quiet while she watched the pattern develop was a choice. The choice of someone who understood that confronting a thing before you have the complete picture is less useful than waiting until the picture is complete. The complete picture was forming. She could see its outline. Kofi was building a public identity as a founder. The interviews, the speaking engagements, the investor relationships in which she was not present. She was present in the actual company, in the Tuesday calls, in the decisions that the public-facing story never mentioned. She was the infrastructure that the visible building stood on, invisible to everyone who looked at the building from the outside. She understood what this meant. Not immediately, she had given it 6 months of patience before she let herself draw the conclusion, but by month 24 she had drawn it. Kofi was not planning to acknowledge the partnership publicly. He was not planning to include her name in the founding story. He was managing the company's public narrative in a way that described it as his creation, his risk, his success. He was not, she thought, a malicious person. He was a person who had found that a certain story about himself was more comfortable than the accurate one and had begun to live in that story. The accurate story had 2 founders. The comfortable story had 1. And the comfortable story had been told so many times in pitches, in interviews, in the company's public materials, that she suspected Kofi had begun to believe it. This was what she was thinking. On the Tuesday in month 28, when she heard her 30% not mentioned in the investor call he had forgotten to mute her out of. She did not say anything on that call. She opened a new folder on her laptop and began to organize. She continued the Tuesday calls. She continued the analysis. She watched the company grow and understood with the specific clarity of someone who works with numbers for a living what 30% of it was worth. In year 3, Kofi stopped returning her calls within 24 hours. This was not a dramatic change. It was the kind of thing that happens gradually in relationships where one person is becoming increasingly important and the other person is not keeping pace. The response times lengthen, the conversations become shorter, the quality of attention shifts. She had seen it in other contexts. She recognized the pattern. She did not confront it immediately. She was, as has been established, someone who observed before she spoke and made sure she had the full picture before she drew a conclusion. She continued to send her analyses. She continued to flag the metrics she was watching. She noticed that the flags were acknowledged less specifically than there used to be a thanks. We'll look at this where there used to be a detailed response engaging with her points. By month 30 of the investment, she had begun to understand what was happening. Not from one thing, from the accumulation of small things that her analytical mind organized into a pattern without her needing to try. The conversations about the company becoming more one-sided, the mentions of the Series B preparation from which she was conspicuously absent, the conversation in month 28 where Kofi described the company's ownership structure to an investor, and she, listening on the call he had forgotten to mute her out of, heard her 30% not mentioned. She did not say anything on that call. She began, instead, to organize. She went back through 3 years of records. She had always kept records. This was not a strategic decision. It was who she was, someone who documented things correctly as a matter of professional habit. The 47 transaction screenshots, each one showing the reference field. The email thread. The WhatsApp conversation from March 2021. The Tuesday call notes she had been keeping in a folder on her laptop, each one dated, each one recording what had been discussed and what decisions had been made. She organized all of it into a folder. She brought it to a lawyer, Mr. Boateng, a corporate attorney who had handled the financial firm's legal work and who she trusted to look at what she had without prejudging it. Mr. Boateng spent 3 hours with the documents. At the end of 3 hours, he looked at her over his reading glasses and said, "Mrs. Asante, this is not a loan. This is documented investment activity. The references on the transactions, the email correspondence, the WhatsApp message together, these establish a course of dealing that constitutes a partnership agreement under Ghanaian commercial law. It is not written in a single formal document, but it is written." She had known this. She had needed someone with the authority to confirm it. And Mr. Boateng had confirmed it in the specific language that made it real in the way that only legal language makes things real. Not the language of friendship, not the language of what was agreed at 11:42 p.m., but the language that would hold in a room with lawyers. This is documented investment activity. Not this might be. Not there's an argument for. This is... The word is doing the work that 3 years of Tuesday evenings and 47 transactions had built it to do. She had driven home from that meeting and sat in her apartment for a long time. She had made tea. She had thought about Kofi, not with anger, which was still present, but which she was filing away in the category of emotions that were real, but not useful for what came next. She had thought about him with the specific sadness of someone who has watched a friendship become something it was not supposed to be, and who understands, clearly, that the person who caused the change is not a villain, but is simply someone who chose comfort over accuracy when the choice was available. She had also thought about the 47 transactions, about the Tuesday evenings, about the pricing error catch in month 4 and the segment identification in month 8 and the valuation timing advice that closed the Series A 40% higher. She had thought about the fact that none of this appeared anywhere in the public story of Okeatech, not in the pitches, not in the press, not in the investor materials, not in the company website that described its founding and named its founder. She had been essential. She had been invisible. The two things had coexisted for 30 months while she continued to do the work and document the records and wait for the moment when the documentation would need to do what she had always understood it might need to do. The moment, Mr. Boateng had said, would come when Kofi made his move. She would be ready. She had always been ready. Being ready was simply what she did with the time that other people spent assuming nothing would happen. "What do we do?" she had asked. "We wait," he had said, "and we are ready when he does." She was. She had been ready for 6 months before the clarification session had been ready, in some sense, since the Tuesday in month 28 when she heard her 30% not mentioned in an investor call and opened a new folder on her laptop. She had calculated the 30% value at the Series B valuation. She had organized the folder. She had practiced, in her own mind, the specific sequence of opening the laptop and turning it to face him and saying, "Which would you like to start with, not as a performance, but as the preparation of someone who understood that when the moment came, the fewer words the better. The documents were going to speak. She simply needed to open them." "What do we do?" she asked. "We wait," he said, "for him to make his move, and we are ready when he does." Kofi called the meeting in month 34. He called it with the specific confidence of a man who had spoken to his lawyer and been told that the absence of a formal partnership document was a strong position. His lawyer had reviewed the situation and had confirmed, without a signed shareholders agreement, without formal equity documentation, the legal basis for a partnership claim was thin. The bank transfers could be characterized as loans. The emails could be characterized as exploratory conversations that never formalized. The WhatsApp message could be dismissed as informal enthusiasm that never became a binding agreement. His lawyer had been thorough. His lawyer had also not seen the 47 transaction references. His lawyer had not seen the email thread with the subject line OKERE Tech Equity Structure. His lawyer had not seen the WhatsApp message. His lawyer had been working from what Kofi told him, and Kofi had told him that there were no documents. This was, in the precise legal sense, not accurate. Kofi arrived at the meeting with his prepared statement. He delivered it with the ease of someone who has rehearsed and believes the rehearsal has prepared him for the room. "You were a supporter. You believed in what I was building. You lent me money. I am grateful. But you were never a partner. There was no equity agreement. There are no documents." He had not seen the laptop. He had not known about the folder Mr. Boateng had reviewed. He had not known that Abena, who had always been the systems person, who had been doing accurate record-keeping since before either of them knew what that would one day mean, had organized 3 years of evidence into a presentation that would take approximately 4 minutes to open, approximately 30 seconds to make the legal position clear. He finished his statement. He let it sit in the room the way he had planned to let it sit. Abena opened her laptop. She turned it to face him. 47 rows, investment round, 1 through investment round, 47. The email thread OKIIE Tech Equity Structure, the WhatsApp screenshot partner 30% confirmed. "We're doing this." The room went quiet in the specific way of spaces where someone has just understood that the ground beneath their position is not what they thought it was. Kofi's lawyer, Atto, reached across and looked at the screen. He turned to Kofi. "Did you know about these?" he said quietly. Kofi did not answer immediately. He was looking at the WhatsApp screenshot. He was looking at his own words, sent at 11:42 p.m. in March 2021, when they were both at the beginning of something, and he had meant every word of it. "Which would you like to start with?" Abena said. "And I want to tell you about the 30 seconds between the WhatsApp screenshot appearing and that question." Atto had leaned forward and looked at the laptop screen. The spreadsheet, 47 rows, investment round 1 through investment round 47. The email thread with subject line OKIEE Tech Equity Structure spanning 3 years. The WhatsApp screenshot partner 30% confirmed. "We're doing this." Kofi's number. 11:42 p.m. Then Atto had looked at Kofi. He had not spoken. His expression said, "You told me there were no documents." Kofi was looking at his own words. He remembered the night, the 2-hour conversation, the moment they agreed the terms, the message he had sent, because it was what he felt and what was true and what he wanted her to know was true. He had not thought about that message in 3 years. He had told himself a story that had not included it. "Kofi," Atto said quietly. Kofi looked at his lawyer. "We need to speak privately." "There's no need," Abena said, not unkindly. "Mr. Boateng has a settlement proposal. Review it with your client. We can reconvene next week." She closed the laptop. The documents had done what documents do when they are accurate. They had made the truth visible to everyone in the room. What happened next was the legal process catching up with what the documents already said. She picked up her laptop bag. She looked at Kofi one more time, the same clear attention she had brought to looking at him for 12 years, the attention that saw what was actually there rather than what was comfortable to see. "Which would you like to start with?" she said again. Quietly, not as pressure, as the genuine question of someone who was going to be in the room however long it took, because the room was going to produce the right answer, and she had always been patient. He did not answer. The screen answered for him. This is what I want you to notice about that moment. Kofi had walked into the room with the confidence of a man who had checked the evidence and found it absent. He had prepared his statement. He had rehearsed the specific language supporter, lender, no equity agreement, no documents that was designed to close the matter cleanly and without concession. And the evidence had not been absent. It had been in a folder on a laptop. It had been organized by someone who had spent her career understanding that the numbers only matter when they accurately describe reality, and who had been accurately describing the reality of this investment since the morning she made the first transfer and labeled it Investment Round 1 because that was what it was. Kofi had not checked for the folder. He had checked for the formal documents, the signed shareholders agreement, the equity certificate, the paper he had never signed, and had not found them, and had concluded from their absence that the case was clear. He had not thought about the transaction references. He had not thought about the email thread. He had not thought about the WhatsApp message he had sent at 11:42 p.m. 3 years ago. He thought about it now. He was looking at it now, and it was reading the way it had always read partner, 30% confirmed. We're doing this. In the same language in which it had been written. With certainty, with intention, with the specific weight of two people deciding to build something together. The legal process that followed the clarification session took 6 months. Kofi's lawyer filed an initial response arguing that the transaction references were self-applied labels created by Abena and did not reflect an agreed characterization of the transfers. Mr. Boateng responded with the email thread in which both parties used the language of equity and investment, not references Abena had applied herself, but a shared vocabulary used by both parties across 3 years of correspondence. Atto filed a second response, arguing that the WhatsApp message was informal communication that did not constitute a legally binding agreement. Mr. Boateng responded with the commercial law precedents establishing that a course of dealing the 47 transactions, the 3 years of emails, the consistent use of investment terminology by both parties could constitute an implied partnership agreement regardless of whether a formal document existed. Atto filed a third response. Mr. Boateng had anticipated it and had a response ready before it arrived. This is what it looks like when one side has prepared thoroughly and the other side has been operating on the assumption that preparation was not necessary. At some point in month 3 of the legal process after the second response, before the third, Kofi called Abena directly, not through his lawyer. He called her the way he used to call her, from his mobile, on a Tuesday afternoon. She answered. "I want to talk," he said, "not through lawyers." She was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. "Talk." The conversation lasted an hour. Kofi said things that were difficult to say, that he had told himself a story about what Abena had been to the company that had made it easier to move the way he was moving, that the story had become more comfortable than the truth, that somewhere in the growth of the company he had begun to believe his own revision of what had happened. He said he was sorry in the specific way that people say sorry when they have been caught, but have also, in the process of being caught, actually understood something. Abena listened. She did not tell him it was fine because it was not fine. She told him what she told other people in other stories, at other kitchen tables, that she had heard him, that what came next between them was a separate question from what had happened, and that she needed the legal matter resolved before she could think about any of it else. He said he understood. He instructed Atto to engage with Mr. Boateng on a settlement. And I want to tell you about that phone call, the one Kofi made on his own, without his lawyer, on a Tuesday afternoon, because it matters that he called on a Tuesday. She had always been the person he called on Tuesdays. For 3 years, every Tuesday, she had been on the other end of the call, going through metrics and catching errors and identifying opportunities. And then the Tuesday calls had stopped, had become shorter, and then infrequent, and then absent. And now, in the week after the clarification session, he called her on a Tuesday. She answered, because she had always answered. He said he had been telling himself a story. He said the story had become more comfortable than the truth. He said that somewhere in the growth of the company he had stopped seeing her 30% and had started seeing the company as his, built by him, risked by him, succeeding because of him, and that this was not accurate, and that he had known it was not accurate and had chosen the comfortable version anyway. This is not a small thing to admit. Most people in Kofi's position, having been caught, having been shown the documents, having had their prepared statement dissolved by a laptop screen, would construct a new story that incorporated the evidence without requiring them to take full responsibility for the revision. They would say, "I forgot," or "I misunderstood," or "my lawyer gave me bad advice." Kofi said, "I told myself a story that made it easier. The story was not true." She listened to all of it without speaking. When he finished, she said she heard him. She said what came next between them was a separate question. She said she needed the legal matter resolved first, but she remembered what he said. She was, as has been established, someone who remembered things. She kept the records. She noted what was said and when. She thought about it on the Tuesday evenings, in the months that followed, when the legal process was running and the settlement was taking shape, what it meant that he had called her on a Tuesday, in the time that had always been theirs, to say the thing he had said. What it meant for what the friendship might eventually become. She did not have an answer yet. She gave herself time. She had always been good at giving things the time they needed. The investment had needed 34 months before the clarification session. The friendship might need longer. She was willing to find out. The settlement took 3 months. It confirmed Abena's 30% equity stake in Okea Tech retroactively from the date of the first transfer, with the documentation that should have existed from the beginning now existing. It also confirmed a board seat, which had not been part of the original conversation, but which Mr. Boateng had included in the settlement demands on the basis that a 30% partner in a company of this size had a reasonable expectation of governance participation. Abena signed the settlement on a Thursday morning. She signed it with the same careful attention she brought to every document, reading each page, confirming that what was written matched what had been agreed. She handed the pen back to Mr. Boateng. "That's it?" he said. "That's it," she said. "For now, let me tell you what 30% of Okea Tech was worth on the Thursday morning. Abena signed the settlement. The platform had, at that point, 41,000 active artisan listings across 12 West African countries. It had processed 320 million cedars in transactions in the preceding 12 months. It had a Series B round that had closed at a valuation that, when applied to 30%, produced a number that Abena had calculated on a Tuesday evening 3 months before the clarification session, sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open and the company's public financial disclosures in front of her. She had calculated it. She had not told anyone the number. She had simply held it the way she had held the folder, the way she had held everything until the right moment. The settlement's confirmation of her equity stake at the Series B valuation meant that 30% of Okea Tech was worth more than she had earned in 6 years of financial analysis work. It was worth more than the sum of all 47 transfers, many times over. It was worth what 3 years of Tuesday evenings and pricing error catches and segment identifications and valuation timing advice were worth, not in the language of friendship, but in the precise, documented, legally confirmed language of equity. She did not feel triumphant about this. She felt something more complicated, the specific mix of satisfaction and grief that comes from being proved right about something you would have preferred not to need to prove. The friendship was not what it had been. She did not know yet if it could become something different from what it had broken into. Kofi had called once more after the settlement, not about the business, just to speak. She had answered. The conversation had been careful and short and had ended with him saying he hoped they could find a way back to something, and her saying she needed time. Time was something she had always been willing to give things. She had given this situation 3 years of patience and 47 transactions and 1 folder of organized evidence. She could give it more time. What she was not willing to give it was the 30%. That had never been negotiable, not in the first conversation when she had said 30 is what this capital is worth at this stage, not in the second when they had talked through the vesting, not in the WhatsApp message at 11:42 p.m. when he had confirmed it, and not in the 6 months of legal process that followed the clarification session. Some things are worth what they are worth. The 30% was worth what it was worth, not because she needed the money, though the money was significant, but because the 30% was the accurate description of her contribution, the accurate description of 3 years of Tuesday evenings and 47 transfers and 1 folder of organized evidence. The money was important. The accuracy was more important. She had spent her career in financial analysis, understanding that the numbers are only useful when they accurately describe reality. Her equity stake was a number that accurately described reality. Having it confirmed in writing was the documentation catching up with the truth. She had also thought carefully about the board seat, the inclusion Mr. Boateng had added to the settlement demands. She had not requested it herself because it had not been part of the original conversation, but she had thought about it when she saw it in the proposal, and she had thought, yes, this is correct. Not because she wanted to make Kofi's life more complicated, because a 30% partner in a company of this size had been doing board-level work from a Tuesday call for 3 years, and it was time for the Tuesday call to happen in the room where the decisions were officially made. She had been the analytical infrastructure. She had caught the pricing error that was costing 15% of potential revenue. She had identified the buyer segment that became the primary market. She had timed the Series A pitch in a way that got it closed 40% higher than planned. She had done this from outside the room. From now on, she would do it from inside. Auntie Grace, the woman who had lent her the seed capital, whose savings had made the first transfer possible, called after the settlement was signed. "Did you get everything?" she said. 30% confirmed, Abena said. Board seat, founding partner credit in the next release. A pause. Then her aunt said, in the voice of someone who had been waiting 3 years for this call, "Good. Now go to the board meeting." "I'm going," Abena said. "And next time," her aunt said, "don't wait 3 years to be in the room." Abena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was in the room the whole time. The room just didn't know it yet." Her aunt laughed the specific laugh of a woman who has been waiting 3 years for her investment to be vindicated and is finding the vindication satisfying. She went to the board meeting and she was ready for it. She had been ready for it for 3 years. That had never been negotiable. From the Tuesday evening, she had modelled the business and understood what the capital was worth and what her involvement would produce from that Tuesday evening forward. The 30% had been as certain in her mind as any number she had ever put in a spreadsheet. It had simply required the right moment to become official. The right moment, as it turned out, had been a clarification session that Kofi had called himself. She had not needed to initiate anything. She had simply needed to open a laptop. OKA Tech released its second major platform update 6 weeks after the settlement was signed. Abena was in the release notes listed for the first time as a founding partner, not an investor, not a supporter. A founding partner with the specific acknowledgement that the platform's early development had been shaped by her analytical input and that the company's current success was built on a foundation that included her contribution. She had not requested this. Mr. Boateng had included it in the settlement terms as a matter of accurate historical record. Kofi had agreed to it without objection, had, in fact, added a sentence to the company's website that described the founding of OKA Tech in terms that included her name in the account of how the platform had come to be. She read the release notes on a Thursday morning at her kitchen table. Her aunt, Auntie Grace, the woman who had lent her a significant portion of the seed capital, who had believed in Abena's judgment enough to hand over her savings, called from across town. "I saw the release notes," Auntie Grace said. "Yes," Abena said. "They put your name?" "Yes." A pause. "It took long enough." "Yes," Abena said. "It did." She took the board seat. She attended the first board meeting with the same preparation she brought to the Tuesday calls, the metrics reviewed, the questions ready, the specific attention of someone who had always been the analytical infrastructure of this company and was now simply doing that work in the room where the decisions were made, rather than on a call that informed the decisions made by someone else. She was good at it. She had always been good at it, the board noticed. The investors, who had not known who she was until the settlement forced the company's history to be stated accurately, asked her questions and received answers that clarified things that had not been clear to them before. One of them, at the end of the first board meeting, said to Kofi afterward, "Why wasn't she in the room from the beginning?" Kofi did not have a good answer for this. It was, perhaps, the most useful question anyone had asked about the previous 3 years. Abena, who was in the corridor and heard the question through the boardroom door, did not answer it either. She had spent 3 years providing the analytical infrastructure for a company that had not put her name on anything. She was in the room now. The question of why it had taken this long was a question for the people who had kept her out of it. She had 47 answers. She kept them in a folder on her laptop. Like the Sankofa bird, she had looked back at the 47 transactions and the Tuesday evenings and the pricing error catch and the segment identification and the valuation timing advice, and she had collected what those years had built. Not the friendship, which was something she was still working out how to hold. Not the bitterness, which she had decided was too expensive an emotion for the return it produced. The 30%. The board seat. The founding partner credit in the release notes. Her name in the accurate account of how something significant had been built. She had always been there. Now the document said so. And that the document saying so was what she had needed. Not the money, though the money was real. Not the board seat, though the board seat was significant. The accurate public record of what had happened and who had been there and what they had contributed. The founding partner credit in the release notes was a small thing in the scheme of things. It was also the thing that made the rest of it complete, the thing that meant the story of OKR Tech now included the person who had made it possible in the account of how it had come to be. She sat in the board meeting, and she was good at it. She had always been good at it. She asked the questions that needed to be asked. She identified the risks in the growth plan that the team had not fully modelled. She suggested the pricing adjustment that would, 3 months later, increase platform revenue by 12%. The investors noticed, the board noticed, Kofi noticed. After the meeting, walking to the parking lot, he fell into step beside her. "The pricing suggestion?" he said. "Yes, it's right. I know," she said. A pause. Then, "I should have had you in the room 3 years ago." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "You should have." That was all. No performance. No extended reckoning. Simply the accurate accounting of 2 people who had been in each other's lives for long enough to have earned the ability to say the true thing without needing to dress it up. They walked to their respective cars. The Accra evening was warm and indifferent around them. The platform had 41,000 active listings and was processing hundreds of millions of CDs in transactions and was going to continue growing with a founding partner now correctly credited, a board seat now correctly occupied, and a document trail that now, finally, accurately described what had happened and who had built it. She drove home. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table where she had once modelled the business over 2 weeks and decided she was in. She thought about the 47 transactions and what they had produced. She thought about the Tuesday evenings. She thought about the folder on her laptop and what it had done when she opened it in a clarification session that had clarified more than Kofi had intended. Like the Sankofa bird, she had looked back at the records, at the organised folder, at the accurate description of what she had built, and she had collected what those years had produced. Not the friendship. Not yet. Not in the form it had been, but something that might, in time, with patience, become something worth having. She was good at patience. She had been practicing it for 34 months. The laptop was closed. The folder was still there. She did not need it anymore. The document said what was true. That was all she had ever needed them to do.